let's get started. I want to talk about how you can improve your Neo4j project with superpowers using APOC. So I want you to become a unicorn, right? One of these really cool unicorns. So basically, it's powering up from being a baby unicorn to be a full-blown rainbow unicorn in your Neo4j project. And we want to use APOC for that. Few words on how it's possible to extend Neo4j. So one of the really cool things that was added to Neo4j is that you can extend it with user-defined procedures and functions. That means you can write code in any JVM language, annotate it a little bit, and deploy it to the database. And then as soon as you do this, those procedures and functions can be accessible through Cypher and allow you to implement any kind of functionality as such. So Lou just showed you the GraphJSON library, and as you've seen, many of those functionalities are also available as procedures. So that's a common extension point. And historically, it was quite interesting. I started with APOC a while ago, and to reduce any name confusion, it's not a name character, the matrix character. It was the original package of components of Neo4j in 2008 or 9 or something like that, where Neo4j 0.1 was bundled for the very first time. But here we refer to it as the awesome procedures in Cypher, which is a standard utility library for Neo4j. Meanwhile, it has more than 550 functions and procedures and aggregation functions, and it supports both Neo4j 3x and 4.0. And it's used by almost all Neo4j users. You can find more about APOC at the labs page, because Neo4j labs has many projects, and one of them is APOC. It started out when Neo4j 3x got this feature. An early alpha or beta version of Neo4j 3.0 had this feature of user-defined procedures, and I wanted to play around with that. And that was an opportunity to add the missing utilities that I always wanted to have in Neo4j. And by the release of Neo4j 3.0, we already had more than 100, I think, procedures and functions. But then it grew quickly to, meanwhile, we have more than 550, as I mentioned. It's a very active open source project. I just checked. It has 81 contributors from all over the place. Some of my colleagues, some people from partners who are super active, but also a lot of people from the outside, which is really, really cool. You can use APOC almost everywhere where you use Neo4j, or actually everywhere where you use Neo4j. In desktop, Sandbox, and Aura, it's built in, so it's either one click and a button click away, or it's already integrated. For other deployments like Docker, you can just provide an additional config parameter as an environment parameter, and it will download and use APOC. Or you can just pull the jar file from the GitHub release page. It's quite easy to install. Lou showed it earlier. You just go to plugins, and then you can install APOC for your database. So here in this case, it's already installed. I'll also show you in a second how this looks like on my computer. There's a ton of stuff in APOC, and it's sometimes hard to kind of keep track of it. So even people that have been working in APOC for a long time still discover new stuff that they didn't know about. And that's why I want to give you a quick overview over some of the things that are in there, but that, of course, there's much more. How can you find out what's actually in there? It's actually not so hard. So there's a built-in help, which is super helpful. You can just call apoc help with a keyword and find the things that you want to know. It also has completion in the browser. And what I really recommend is the Neo4j APOC docs, which my colleague Mark Needham is continuously improving and has done a really great job of making better. There are also other things like an APOC browser guide, video collection, which we want to add to, which is a playlist, and the community forum. So just really quickly to show you what it looks like, and I have a database here called apoc 4.0. If I click on manage, I can manage my plugins here as well, and I already installed apoc here. And what this does, it downloads the jar. So you see in the plugin directory that there's the apoc jar in here. And it also adds a line to the settings, this one, because it allows apoc to use some internal APIs of Neo4j. And if you want to read and write to your local file system, you have to add these kind of settings explicitly. We don't add them by default. Of course, that's something that I just did manually. But this allows you to export data to the file system or read data from the file system. So that's a security precaution. If I go to browser, I can just use apoc, as I said, by just calling apoc help. And for instance, if I want to know something about like refactor, I get all the procedures and functions that help me refactoring my graph. Or if I want to do something with JSON, then I can just do apoc help JSON, and it shows me all the stuff that I can do with JSON, with description, signature, and so on. But also, as you know, browser at least completes procedure names. So if I do apoc load something, then I see kind of all the load procedures. Or if I say apoc refactor, then it also shows me all the procedures with the signature here as well. So I see also these kind of help built in. Okay, so that's kind of how you get apoc up and running. And in other systems like Sandbox and Aura, it's already built in. And in Docker, for instance, you can just provide an environment variable to pull it. The first area that I want to look at is data integration. So apoc integrates with a lot of different databases. It has JDBC support, so it can connect to all relation databases. It can pull data from Neo4j, from Elasticsearch, from Mongo, from Hadoop, from S3, from HDFS, and so on. It can write a number of formats and read a number of formats from JSON, Excel, CSV, XML, and also GraphML and CipherScript. So there's a lot of things that you can read and write from into Neo4j using apoc. And there's quite detailed documentation about import and export, just updated by my colleague Mark, as I said. One example that I really like is apoc.load.json, because that's really close to my heart, kind of consuming web APIs and JSON files that come from all kinds of different sources. What's really cool is that it also supports JSON line format, so streaming JSON, where you have one JSON object and then a new line. So you don't have to pull the whole JSON document into memory. You can just process it as a stream of objects. It can also deal with compressed data. So if you have gzip files with JSON, then it handles that as well. And it has JSON path support. So if you have to extract a sub tree of your JSON, then you can also access that. Here's an example. So if you look at Stack Overflow, it has an API which gives you questions back. And you can use that with apoc.load.json to just create a graph from the data. And that's something that I want to show you now. It's basically we take the API URL from Stack Overflow, call apoc.load.json, and then we deconstruct the returning document as a graph. So we turn each question into a question graph, connected to the poster, connected to text, connected to the people answering, and so on. And you can find the example for this in the JSON, in the apoc docs. So if I look here at the apoc.load.json docs, I have here this example that accesses the Stack Overflow API, and I just want to show you the final result, basically, which takes this API and does the load JSON, as I said, and then constructs the question, connects the text, connects the poster as well here, and also connects answers to this question. If I run this, this will pull 100 questions from the API, the last 100 question. And if I pull this, it actually creates 380 nodes and 500 something relationships. So you can see these are people asking questions about certain tags as well. So we can also look at, for instance, if you look at tags, you can see them here as well. And if I look at, for instance, JavaScript, I see all the questions that are related to the JavaScript tag. And then I can query the data in Neo4j. And of course, I can iterate over the pages and don't just import one, but import multiple pages of all the 18,000 questions and answers in Stack Overflow. So it basically looks like this. Another thing that APOC handles and supports really well is huge transactions. As you know, Neo4j is a transactional database. And so transactional data has to be kept in memory as an overlay over your actual graph data until your transaction is committed. And that means that your memory is the limit of the transaction size. And that's why if you have large operations, it's good to split them. And APOC helps to do this really nicely automatically with a procedure called apoc.periodic.iterate, which is split basically in a driving statement and an executing or updating statement. So that means the driving statement provides the data to operate on, and the executing statement actually does the updates. So it could be anything from loading data, creating something in the graph refactorings, graph updates, large scale, like multi-billion node, aggregation summations and things like that. It supports batching, parallel execution, so operations that don't interfere with each other or lock with each other, that can also be done in parallel. So for instance, if you just update properties, add labels, or things like that, or create nodes, then you can run these in parallels. You can also handle retries, and so it's quite useful. And one example I have here is to just create 1 million nodes really quickly. And so to run this, I can just go to browser and say, call apoc.periodic.iterate, do the unwind range of 1 to 1 million zeros as ID. And then my update statement is basically just create node with ID, and that's it. And so that means for each of those 1 million node, and I can say batch size is 10,000 and parallel true. And then let's see how my apoc deals with this. Oh, I forgot to write for the ID in the driving statement. And this will create 1 million nodes in batches of 10,000 each. So if I run queries now, yeah, I should see all these batch operations, because it takes each batch and prepends it with an unwind, so it does not execute 10,000 queries per batch, but only one query per batch, and then does the full 10,000 operations in one go, so which is more efficient. So and now we're done. And so I created 1 million node in 36 seconds. So we have now 1,800,381 nodes. Right. So on all the CPUs, we're basically keeping up. Okay, next one is utilities. Utilities is really broad because it covers a large range of things. So there's a ton of text utilities, all kinds of text operations, from regular expression replaces to capitalization to LPAD and OPAD and case changes to utilities for hex codes and base64 encoding and lots of other things. String format, there's also a text repeat and so on. So you can basically make a lot of word out with APOC. Same is true for collections. So Cypher has built-in collections, which is really cool. But there are only a selected number of functions available for collections, so APOC adds a lot of things on top of collections. So you can sum, min, max on collections. You can zip collections. You can partition a collection into smaller sub-partitions. You can get pairs of collections and things like that, uniqueness. You can do collections operations like disjunctions, unions, and things like that. Really useful. Same for maps. My favorite is to create maps from data. So you can have pairs of values or 2 lists of keys and values and so on. You can merge multiple maps. You can change maps, which actually creates a new map where the change happened. And apoc map clean is super useful for actually cleaning up data that you get from import. Just to show you an example, which is apoc map clean. So if I have a map, if I have this map and I want to clean out the key A, and I want to clean out the value bar, for instance, here, then I just can provide a list of keys to clean out and a list of values to clean out. I can also provide things like null or not applicable or something like that here. And then as result, and then I can just use this function to clean out this map, and only B is remaining. So for instance, if you have an input stream with data where you have a lot of like NA values or null values or things like empty space values that you want to clean out, then you can use that. Or if you have certain keys that you want to skip because you handle them separately, then that's really nice for, setting node data as a result of this cleaned map, which is really useful. JSON conversions is also quite a lot of things there. So you can turn JSON into strings. You can turn strings into maps and lists again. You can turn JSON apoc paths into a JSON document tree. You can store and load properties as JSON, basically. So it's quite useful for all kinds of JSON processing. Graph refactoring is quite important as well, because oftentimes you have get new requirements or you want to change the shape of your graph. And so it can do a lot of things on both nodes and relationships. It can clone nodes, merge nodes, extract nodes from a relationship, collapse the relationship into a node, can categorize nodes, pull out a category node, for instance. It can rename relationships. It can redirect relationships or invert them, for instance. So that's quite useful. And so you can use that quite a lot. So here's one example. If I have duplicate nodes in my graph, for instance, I have twice imported, for whatever reason, gym is imported twice, and I want to merge all the gym nodes together. I kind of just group this by the primary key of my entity and get all the collections that have more than one entry. And then I just call merge nodes on that, and it will merge onto the first node in this collection. So all the relationships and all the properties are merged. And for the properties and relationships, you can also provide additional configuration that says, should I, just take the first one? Should I take the last one? Should I add them up together? Should I turn them into a list if I have multiple properties and so on? So that's a quite useful operation here. Same as for dynamically creating data and adding things, while Cypher doesn't support dynamic tokens like labels or relationship types or property names. There's a lot of functions in APOC that allow you to create and add dynamic data, like here's a list of labels that you can add to a node. And then you can basically add a genre as a label instead of having it as a property, for instance. But you can also create nodes and relationships dynamically by passing in labels and relationship types dynamically as well. Triggers is quite an interesting feature, which allows you to provide a Cypher statement and say, I want to run this before commit or after commit. And so you can, notify things, log things, or even veto updates from Neo4j, and you get passed in a number of variables with like which nodes has been created, which nodes properties have been assigned, which nodes have been deleted, and the same for relationships. And so you can act on those as such. And they're also stored in the graph and stored at startup of your database, so you don't have to recreate the triggers as such. You can also pause and resume them and so on. TTL is also quite interesting because it gives you short-lived nodes where you can say, if I have a label TTL on a node, on an additional label, and a TTL property, it will, if this is enabled in config, it will expire those nodes when the time has passed. And there's also a utility function that gives you a means to set an expiry date on a node automatically, and adds the label and the time to live as such. This is run by a background scheduler in Neo4j. So, and it creates basically an index on TTL and runs this periodically and removes those nodes in batches every 60 seconds by default, and that's configurable. Aggregation functions was something that was added in Neo4j 3.2, and usually you do something like min, max, sum, or collect, which is the most powerful collection function because it creates a list of values that you can then operate on. And but for large volumes, you don't want to do a gigantic collect and then a slice. So that's why we added a bunch of APOC aggregation functions that give you the first, the last, or a certain slice or the nth value of a collection. So it only keeps this one value, not the whole collection. And then there are also functions that use things like percentiles or products or statistics or medians of aggregations. And something that was added recently is you can also use APOC to define custom procedures based on a cipher statement. So you basically say, this is my signature of my procedure or function, and then this is my cipher statement, and all the parameters of the node are returned as. Sorry, this is flipped around. I just see that. That's flipped around. All the parameters of the procedure signature are passed in as parameters to cipher, and then the results are returned as in the syntax here. Latest additions, lots of input-export improvements, Excel read and write, export to cipher script, which is quite useful for exporting subgraphs and then importing them, for instance, into a cloud database. APOC graph from document is basically like apoc.load.json, but it automatically creates the graph from the document following certain rules. There's APOC export JSON and import JSON as a round trip using JSON lines, so one object per line, which is really cool. And some 4.0 things like you can access the system database as well. And as I said, there's a lot of documentation already available. If you have requests for improvements in the documentation, you can do so on the docs sites themselves. Otherwise, I asked you to report issues and contribute to APOC. It's really not hard. Each of those are just a few lines of Java code or JVM code, and that would be really nice. And if you have questions, you can ask on the community forum or on Slack or now in BigMarker, which I'm going to open now again. Let me do this. Any questions? If not, let me just quickly scan through. If you can't install APOC on Neo4j, then please check which version of the database you have and if your desktop is online. So your desktop has an online-offline mode, and if you are in offline mode, it doesn't allow you to install plugins, so you should disable offline mode here. So what else? So that's a good point. Neo4j got more specific, and so the question is there a specific place in the config file to enable export and import? Actually, in 4.0, good that you asked this. In 4.0, it changed a little bit. So Neo4j is much more specific on what it allows. And so actually what we should have done instead, adding these here, we should edit them to a separate apoc.conf file, because Neo4j itself is a little bit more restrictive in what it allows. And so we should actually open this. Okay. So there's a conf folder here. And we should actually create a new file that contains the configuration called apoc.conf, and we should just put this here. So in Neo4j 4, the configuration access is more limited in Neo4j.conf, so it's also a section in the documentation that talks about this for 4.0. But otherwise, in the config file, in 3x, it doesn't matter where you put it. There's no order to it. It's just for human consumption ordered. Okay. Cool. Offline node. Super. Okay. Thank you all, and see you soon. Bye.